Good morning, my name is Paddy Nixon. I'm the Vice-Chancellor here at the University of Canberra, and I'm here to speak with Michelle Grattan on a week in politics. Good morning, Michelle.
Hi, Paddy.
Let's start with the lockdowns. I think we have 13 million people locked down in 3 states, in New South Wales, Victoria and South Australia. The numbers in Sydney are increasing again. I think they went up yesterday and they're going up again tomorrow. And we've got all of the challenges with vaccinations. So if we start with the vaccination piece, I think yesterday Scott Morrison announced that he's going to enable pharmacies in regional areas to deliver the vaccine, that they will be covered by indemnity as the GPs will be or are. Why has it taken so long for him to get to this point?
Well, that's a very good question, Paddy. I think it's a question that the government should be pressed to answer, because clearly if the pharmacies had been involved earlier, I think you would have seen a faster and more efficient rollout. Now, the only explanation that I can see is that the doctors opposed this. The AMA was opposed to pharmacies right back early in the year. The pharmacies were always due to come online. I think it was mid-year initially, then that was pushed back a bit, but now it's been brought forward again, and clearly the government has been pretty desperate now to get this rollout moving faster, and it's taken this logical step. But really it's reprehensible that it wasn't done before. Now, pharmacies are only going to give the AstraZeneca vaccine, of which of course there's a lot, but not the Pfizer one, of which there's not enough and which many people are wanting. But still, they're in the game, and that's very important. We've had a few in the last few weeks in country areas where GPs are short, but now it'll be a much more mass effort.
And this is going to be one of those things that carries on as part of the whole debate ongoing about vaccinations and dealing with that by the government.
Well, that's right, and I think when the postmortems are done on this whole policy exercise, then the question of why all the outlets that were available were not used in the earlier stages will be a big one.
And speaking of the speed of the rollout of vaccinations, Scott Morrison apologised on behalf of the government for some of the failures in the vaccination programme. But it seems that he was had to be dragged a little bit to saying sorry. He's not a man for saying sorry. He likes to point to other people. Is this change in language significant?
Well, yes and no. He was being pursued by the media. He and his advisors knew that until he said sorry, every press conference, every interview would feature the question, why aren't you saying sorry, PM? So he did it. I don't think that change in language, call me cynical, but I don't think that change in language means a lot. I think it was an attempt to get something off the political agenda, the sorry issue off the agenda. But what has been really important this week is that the Prime Minister is urging very strongly now the use of the AstraZeneca vaccine by anybody who's willing to take it, and he's really contested the advice from ATAGI, which is the immunisation advisory group, and really tried to lean on ATAGI to change its advice. Now, that advice is nuanced, but basically it says Pfizer's better for people under 60, except when there's an infection outbreak and the risk profile changes, and then you get what you can, you get AstraZeneca. But I think that this argument over the official advice is going to be a difficult one for the Prime Minister, because it's a politician trying to act as a doctor, and I don't think that's a good look.
No, not at all. And I don't think you're being cynical. I think that's realism.
Well, it's interesting that I heard on the way over that the GPs College in Tasmania is saying stick with the advice about Pfizer for the under 60s in Tasmania, because there you don't have an outbreak. So how does the Prime Minister react to that? You know, you go down these trails in a sort of political sense when really it's a question of expertise, and you can get yourself into a really bad position. Also, of course, there were a couple of deaths this week, or reported this week, of people in their 40s who'd had the AstraZeneca vaccine. Now, I want to stress that the chances of blood clots are very small. This is a very rare phenomenon, but nevertheless, playing into this whole debate about what the Prime Minister says and advises, this is a really complicated situation.
Indeed it is. Just moving to a different topic, I think tonight the UNESCO World Heritage Committee is going to be voting on whether to label the Great Barrier Reef as in danger. It's reported that the Australian government have made a significant effort in lobbying members of that Heritage Committee to postpone this vote until 2023. A question that jumps out to me immediately is, are they spending too much time to not be labelled in danger rather than dealing with the issue of what is a real challenge with the Great Barrier Reef?
Well, clearly this goes to the climate change issue, and that's, of course, an enormous debate in Australia, and obviously the government has not dealt with that adequately. Governments over quite a while haven't dealt with it well. More specifically on the reef, well, there has been efforts made there, but I think not enough. As you say, there's an immense lobbying campaign that's been underway. Susan Lee, the Environment Minister, has gone internationally, tripping to put the case, Australia's case, to delegates. And locally, I think the diplomats have been taken, diplomats from Canberra have been taken snorkelling on the reef too.
Well, I hadn't heard that one.
So yes, all stops are being pulled out on this, and the latest is that maybe Australia has the numbers to delay things, but we'll know soon enough.
But is this just an optics thing? They just don't want to be labelled in this way in the context of all of those debates about climate change at the moment, net zero.
Well, that's right, and it's also a really, really bad thing for Australia to have this this great natural asset that's known around the world, and to be essentially labelled as not looking after it properly.
On a slightly more positive note, it's now been announced the 2032 Olympics will be in Brisbane and in Queensland. A huge achievement for Brisbane. Scott Morrison's been almost immediately very clear this is a 50-50 games. What does this mean for Queensland and, in fact, for Australia?
I think it is a very good thing for Australia. The 2000 Olympics in Sydney, the 1956 Olympics in Melbourne were great events and did big things for those cities and I think for the country as a whole. Maybe the Olympics doesn't have quite the impact that it once did, but nevertheless it will mean a good deal of development around Brisbane, and it will focus the attention of the international community on Australia, at least for a brief time in quite a few years away. But it's interesting that the federal government has agreed to 50-50 funding, but has stressed that it wants 50-50 planning control. The roles will be equal. Of course, there's been a lot of tension between the coalition in Canberra and the Palaszczuk Labor government in Queensland, especially during the pandemic, and relations at times are quite tense. But I think Scott Morrison recognises that this is a moment, and it's good to be positive, but also to get some ownership of the project.
Yeah, well, there's a history of Olympic Games developments running over cost, and so that's obviously something that's front and centre in everybody's mind.
Well, that's right, and of course the Premier and the Prime Minister, I think it's a fair bet, won't be in their respective roles when the Games comes around, but nevertheless they will be laying the groundwork for them.
Well, look, fascinating as always, Michelle. Thank you very much, and I look forward to chatting to you again.
Thanks, Paddy. Good to talk.